All right, so today we're tackling something huge, a potential new chapter in mental health. We're talking about a single dose of psilocybin for the most severe treatment-resistant depression. But here's the twist. It also creates this massive scientific puzzle. How do you actually measure if something like this is working? Let's dive in.
For so many people, this isn't just a question. It's their reality. It's this painful loop of trying a medication, pouring all your hope into it, and then nothing. So you try another and another. What do you do when you feel like you've run out of road? And that right there, that brings us to the heart of the problem we're talking about today: treatment-resistant depression. For these folks, the standard rulebook for mental health care just isn't cutting it. And the tough part is, the odds actually get worse with every new thing you try.
And just how bad are the odds? Well, there was this landmark study called the STARS trial, and it laid it all out in black and white. So after your first antidepressant, okay, about a third of people find relief. Not terrible, right? But just look what happens next. The chance of success with the second one drops. By the time you're on your third or fourth attempt, the rate just plummets. It's like hitting a brick wall.
And this is exactly where our story really zooms in. We're not just talking about being hard to treat. We're talking about severe treatment-resistant depression. A recent paper defines this as failing to respond to at least 5 different treatments. Just think about that. 5 swings, 5 misses. At that point, the odds of the next conventional treatment working are practically 0. So yeah, that's a pretty grim picture. But what if there's a new chapter? This is where a potential breakthrough comes into play. A new study from that same team, Aronson and his colleagues, decided to try a pretty radical approach for this exact group of patients. So here's the setup. It was a small, super-focused study. They took 12 patients with this severe TRD. The intervention? A single 25 milligram dose of psilocybin. But, and this is so important, it wasn't just, here's a pill, call me in the morning. No way. It was this whole package deal with therapy before, a full day of support during, and more therapy after to help make sense of it all. And they tracked the results using a standard depression scale. And the results? Honestly, they were jaw-dropping. Before the treatment, the average depression score for these patients was way up there, deep in the severe range. Just 3 weeks after that single dose, bam, the score was cut in half. And this wasn't some flash in the pan. 12 weeks later, that improvement was still holding strong. I mean, for people who've tried everything else and failed, this is absolutely remarkable. Let's break that down and look at what happened to the actual people. At that 3-week mark, over 40% of them were in remission. That means, clinically speaking, they weren't considered depressed anymore. Another 25% had a really significant response. All told, 2/3 of these incredibly treatment-resistant patients got a real, meaningful benefit from one dose. It sounds amazing, right? Almost too good to be true. And you know what they say? If something sounds too good to be true, well, in science, that's a signal to dig a little deeper. And this is where our story gets a major plot twist. And it all comes down to the unsung hero of any good study, the control group. We have to ask the big question, right? The results are powerful, but how can we be sure that the effect is really as massive as it looks? How much of this is actually the drug itself? And how much is the therapy, the expectation, or just the raw power of hope? So, the way scientists try to answer that is with a control group. It's a pretty simple idea. One group gets the real drug, the other gets a fake, a placebo, like a sugar pill. Then you compare the two, and the difference between them, well, that's the true effect of the drug. It's the gold standard for a reason. But here's the catch. What happens when the real drug gives you a full-blown psychedelic experience? Okay, so this brings us to our second key piece of research. A team of scientists did something really, really clever. They didn't just run another psilocybin trial. Instead, they did a meta-analysis. They looked at a whole bunch of existing studies, but they didn't focus on the drug groups. They focused on the control groups. They wanted to know how the placebo groups in psilocybin trials stacked up against placebo groups for other antidepressants. And what they found is the core of our puzzle today. It turns out when you get a placebo in a trial for, say, an SSRI, you still get a pretty decent improvement. That's the placebo effect. But in the psilocybin trials, the folks who got the placebo, they barely improved at all. Their placebo effect was strangely weak, like half of what you'd normally expect to see. Let's put a hard number on that. In a typical SSRI trial, about a third of the people on the placebo still report feeling better. A third. But in the psilocybin trials, that number was less than 1 in 5. That is a huge 14-point difference. It seems like getting the placebo in one of these trials is just uniquely disappointing. So, what does this all mean? If the people in the placebo group are doing way worse than they should be, what does that say about those incredible results we saw earlier? It's a real puzzle we need to unpack.
No, let's be super clear about something. This does not mean that psilocybin doesn't work. The hope from that first study is still very real. But what it does suggest is that the gap between the drug and the placebo might look bigger than it really is. Is the gap so huge because the drug is just that amazing? Or is it because the placebo side is performing so poorly? We might be overestimating the true effect.
So why is this happening? Well, researchers have a few pretty good ideas. The biggest one is called functional unblinding. Let's be real. If you take a powerful psychedelic, you're going to know you didn't get the sugar pill. The blind is broken. But then think about the flip side. You've built up all this hope for a life-changing experience, and then nothing happens. That crushing disappointment could actually make your symptoms feel worse. It's like the opposite of a placebo effect.
And all of this really brings us to a major crossroads for psychedelic science. On one hand, you have a treatment that shows so much promise for the sickest patients. And on the other, you have a scientific method that's clearly struggling to measure it accurately. So what's the path forward?
The scientists who did that big analysis on the control groups, they put it pretty bluntly. They basically said that because the control groups are performing so poorly, we need to be cautious. It suggests that psilocybin's effect, while totally real, might not be quite as powerful or as broad as the current data makes it seem. So let's tie all this together. What's the bottom line? First, the hope is absolutely real. For patients who have run out of options, these studies are a genuine beacon. Second, measuring this stuff is incredibly hard. The very nature of a psychedelic experience is kind of breaking our standard scientific tools. Which brings us to number 3. We just need better science. The real challenge now is for researchers to get creative and design smarter trials that can really nail down the true benefit.
Which leaves us with the ultimate puzzle for this entire field of research, doesn't it? When the treatment itself is a profound, subjective, undeniable experience, how do you even begin to design a placebo for it? Answering that question is the key to unlocking the true potential of psychedelic medicine.